Camshafts. With the basic build in place, let's look at improving the efficiency, starting with some camshafts. The factory camshaft of the 993 Turbo is nearly identical to the Carrera for the first time. Prior 911 Turbos have always had wimpy camshafts with very low lift and close center lines, similar to something you'd see in your Chevy 1-ton pickup truck. These were this way because Porsche was trying very hard to avoid the dreaded turbo lag and poor low-speed response. So they had always run tiny ports and cams designed to pull stumps out of the ground while letting the turbochargers try to make up for it in the high end. Well, the 993 Turbo came into the modern age with a new outlook on life. The base engine is very similar to the Carrera that already made as much power as the original 930s. Then, with turbos, it simply magnified the already wonderful base engine. Like the Carrera, the 993 Turbo can benefit from some fun camshafts since it already has very nice ports, valves, and an intake designed to flow well up into the 7,000 RPM band. A fun choice on these cars are GT2 Evo Cams, which move the lobe centers a bit closer while increasing the duration and lift for a much broader power curve. The original cams, like the Carreras before, tended to produce peak torque up in the 5,000 RPM band and peak power in the low to mid 6,000s, where the Evo camshaft broadens that power curve by moving the peak torque down to nearly 4,000 RPMs while allowing the peak power to stay in the mid 6s or be pushed to at or over 7,000 RPMs, depending on turbo and intake manifold selection. It's a great choice, usually requiring a solid rocker conversion, so let's talk about those for a bit. Hydraulic versus solid rockers. The norm when changing cams on this engine has always been to change over to solid rockers. We've seen this done wrong so many times it's pretty frustrating. Some shops simply drop 911, 930, or 964 rockers in place of the hydraulics, thinking everything is the same, but the 993 uses pressure-fed rockers for the hydraulics. The solid rockers used a spray bar to spray not only the lobes, but to lubricate the shafts through a small hole in the rocker. When installing the solid rockers onto a pressure-fed shaft, the oil ends up coming out of the hole designed to collect the spray, causing the rocker to fail due to a lack of lubrication. Some kits have shafts with smaller holes in them to help not lose pressure. But this still is an issue since the oil hole is still letting the oil out rather than distributing it properly around the bushing. You can run solid shafts, change the spray bars over from 993 to 911, 930, or 964 to accomplish a backdate, or even backdate the cam housings to pre-993 along with the valve covers. The Super Cup 993 rockers were solid and simply used a solid bushing with a spiral oil groove in the bushing to feed the bushing properly, and this seemed to work best. So we tend to follow Porsche's guidance on a lot of these mods, as they have a lot more development funds and years of racing to prove what works. When updating the cams to GT2 Evo or some other grind, you have the option to switch over to solid rockers, but don't forget solid rockers need maintenance. That's fine for racing, but for street cars you'll be expecting much more extended maintenance intervals. For that, we designed a hydraulic Evo Cam that's worked very well. It's not lumpy on idle like the solid rocker version, although it has the same broad torque characteristic and improved boost response, which has been a win-win. Improved performance without improved performance without increased maintenance are both check marks on my list. What about you? If you're planning on tracking the car, running a much more aggressive camshaft and higher RPM with extended runtime in the high RPM band, the solid rockers are a better choice. When running the hydraulics at 7,000 RPMs for an extended time, the hydraulics can tend to pump up with stock valve springs and eventually push the valve into the piston, which is not a fun meet and greet. Single versus twin plug. Twin plugging the 993 Turbo can provide gains similar to a 3.8 bump over 3.6. You can see about 5% improvement in power and torque, increased boost response, better drivability, and even idle quality can improve. To install a twin plug ignition system, the factory method will require drilling, tapping, and relieving the cylinder heads for the lower plug hole. You'll need a twin plug distributor from the 993 Carrera along with the plug wire set. You'll also need another coil and a method to drive it, since the 1997 to 1998 993 Turbo ECU removed the unnecessary set of ignition drivers. Interestingly, the 1995 to 1996 DME had the extra coil drivers in there, although unused. We commonly run CD multi-spark ignition systems on the 993 Turbo, as the OEM ignition tends to go flat for anything over 500 wheel horsepower levels. This also allows us to split the single output from the DME to dual CD amplifiers, making it more of a plug-and-play solution. Then the tune will also need to be changed, since the new twin-plug flame front is so much shorter. The timing will need to be considerably lower. In this instance, that's a great thing versus having to lower the timing due to fuel quality. The shorter flame travel gives more consistent combustion, which is even more important as the engine size increases with 3.8 or 4 liter builds. Where a single plug may be misfiery, the twin plug setup will be butter smooth. Stroker cranks. Like a big bore, stroker cranks are increasing the displacement of your engine, but in a way that also tends to improve the throttle response, boost response, low speed torque, and overall power under the curve. This is due to the increased piston velocity from the piston having to travel further during any given RPM. This effect increases the volumetric efficiency of your engine, as well as improved action of the piston and connecting rod on the crankshaft, since the rod journal is further away from the center line. All this adds up to an engine that pulls away at your smallest request of throttle input. It feels livelier and gives you better control over whatever road you're conquering. We like our 80.4 cranks with factory-style oiling and 996 GT3 rod journal sizes over the factory 4-liter 997 GT3 crank that has narrow, large-diameter journals that cause oil pump clearance issues. The wider bearing in our cranks also have a larger surface area for that huge torque you're producing to spread out, decreasing the pressure on the oil film and keeping the bearings from contacting the rod journals. Our cranks are designed primarily for big torque turbo engines, but also work well with GT3 top ends up in the mid to 8,000 RPM band. The big engines feel amazing at lower boost as well, since there's another 10% plus in displacement available. This all comes together for incredible capability in an already amazing car. Fuels. We touched on this a bit in the methanol injection system, but as the power continues to go up into the 7 and possibly 800 horsepower levels, it becomes so much more important. We're already dealing with tremendous combustion pressures up in this range, and knock can be devastating. The higher the octane, the more resistant it is to knock, and staying far away from it will keep your engine very happy indeed. But fuel wears a lot of hats. It has to power your engine by providing smooth and stable combustion. It needs to be resistant to knock. It needs to combust in such a way that its exhaust gases are not contaminating the air we breathe. It even helps cool your engine down, and on an air-cooled engine, this becomes critical at this point. Porsche did a tremendous amount of development on the 911 air-cooled engine up through the 935 and halfway into the 956 that ended up running water-cooled 4-valve heads, since the power levels were getting to be too much for the air-cooled heads. For this same reason, 4-valve air-cooled heads have a sub 500 horsepower limitation, since the area between the exhaust valves will simply overheat. So when running pump gas type fuels on air-cooled engines, Porsche always ran them super rich to help with the cooling. Methanol injection assists with this a bit more. Pure racing fuels help as well, since they tend to burn cooler than fuel out of the pump. Enter E85. It's been magical on the 996 and 997 turbos, and is even more so on the air-cooled engines. The cooling effect of E85 tends to keep the cylinder heads cool, which in turn keeps the strength of the materials, which in turn keeps the engine alive, even at these incredible power levels. Even though race fuels run cooler than pump gas, they get hotter and hotter the more power you produce. This is evident by the reduction in timing required as the boost and power levels increase, where E85 tends to get more stable as power goes up. The heat being produced plateaus, since the cooling effect of the ever more alcohol in the combustion chamber more than offsets the amount of heat being produced by the increased power. In effect, The E85 powered air-cooled engines have lower knock sensitivity at 1.6 bar than the same engine running barely half that boost level. So if you have E85 available, it's really an incredible upgrade. Conclusion. So let's wrap this all together and see where we're at. We've bored, stroked, cammed, and strengthened our engines. We've greatly improved the efficiency of it with improved ignition, increased airflow through cams and turbo upgrades, and protected it with proper fuels and intercooler cooling. A recent engine we built with all of this coming together produced 760 wheel horsepower and 700 foot-pounds of torque while driving like a factory car. It had vastly superior boost response and drivability. It was an absolute joy to drive. It didn't require crazy RPMs or an aggressive driving style to drive quickly, and even ran a street exhaust system versus being loud and racy. It's a true gentleman's car, and by far our favorite build. Yes, we've built 800, 900, and 1000 wheel horsepower 993 turbos as well. Those tended to be more racy versions, running open exhaust, big turbos, race fuel, and launch control. All very fun builds for sure. And these cars have so much potential that there's ne'er a personality you couldn't build one to match. So watch out for the minor issues these cars have, and be sure to enjoy the amazing potential they provide.